is the Awesemo Yahoo NFL strategy show. Steve Buzzard and I are running it back. We weren't exactly sure what the schedule would look like this week, but not only are we together, Steve, for one show this week, but two shows. You and I were doing the Yahoo show today, then we're doing the DraftKings and FanDuel show tomorrow because Neil's away on vacation. Steve, I have to imagine this is a pinnacle of your DFS career.
No doubt. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything any better than 2 times hanging out. I got a lot of good takes from our show. Last week, it helped me, get on the right players, I think, and I had a pretty successful week with it, and I think we can do it again.
Something that you in particular helped me more than anything is all throughout building my lineups last week. And by the way, I didn't have the best week one in the world. However, one thing that I was on the right side of just because of you for the main slate was I was in the projections when I was just running my lineups, I was a little higher on Kyle Pitts than I would have liked to be. And the entire time I heard your voice in the back of my head saying, hey, rookie tight end, we don't know what his role is going to look like in week one. He continued to get more and more popular as we got closer to the slate. So rolled back my exposure to Kyle Pitts, and that was definitely something that helped secure me some min cashes I wouldn't have secured otherwise. So thank you to you for that. And once again, there's going to be some pretty popular players to look at today over on Yahoo. But first, we're running some pretty crazy promos. Steve, are you aware of some of the promos we're running with Yahoo?
Yeah, it's like almost insane the deals that we're giving out right now. I mean, I don't think since I've been here anyways, we haven't given out anything as good as this. So yeah, I think it's pretty amazing and people should definitely be taking advantage.
Yeah, lots of sign-up offers, and this one in particular. If you guys are new to Yahoo Daily Fantasy, if you've not signed up yet, we have a link up on our site that if you sign up through Awesemo.com, you make a minimum deposit of $10. That's all you need to make is a deposit of $10 over at Yahoo.com. And that'll get you 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. That is a $180 value. All you have to do is sign up through Awesemo.com. That'll get you 2 months of Awesemo Plus Platinum, which will give you tools, everything. Slack chat, come in Slack. You could DM me, you could bug me, ask me all the questions you like. I'm very codependent. I'm always in there to answer people's questions. Also, get you everything we have on the site, projections and tools for everything for not just Yahoo, but DraftKings, FanDuel as well. And it'll help you get on the winning track there. So good way to start getting involved in Yahoo if you've not done so already. Just head on over to the site. It only takes a $10 deposit to get $180 of value back. So definitely something to take advantage of. But that aside, let's get into the Yahoo slate for week 2. But first, just a kind of general strategy question. And beware, I'm probably going to ask you this tomorrow also because there's going to be a little bit of a different audience. But I think it's something that kind of bears repeating. How much of the lessons that you learned in week 1, or is there much that you take away that you bring into week 2 with you?
Yeah, so I think that is a hugely important thing that you should be considering. Most of the stuff that we see in week 1 is going to be an overreaction. Like if you were in week 15 and something happened in week 14 and you're like, it wouldn't mean like anything to you, right? You don't even care. But everyone only has that one data point right now, so they're going to consider it pretty high. There are a few things that you can take away that you don't want to just completely throw away, like guys that are playing a little bit more often than you would like or expected, or vice versa. They're not playing as much as you expected. Those are the main things I'm going to take away. If someone had a touchdown or a couple big plays, that's something that I'm less excited about. Certainly it was fun during week 1 to help your team win, but it may not be very indicative going forward. So those are probably the biggest things I'm going to take away. But in general, you're probably going to be more right to just use like preseason projections almost this week than you are anything from week 1, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's totally sensible. And like you said, also, I mean, it's a fairly short NFL season, but whatever feelings you had on players in week 1, depending on the situation, they shouldn't massively change for week 2. Now, somebody like Brandon Ayuk, who barely played in week 1, he has a different outlook than he does in week 2. And then somebody like last night, Diami Brown was a great value play for a single game contest. And he didn't produce the greatest game in the world, but at least he was good from a value perspective. And even though he didn't have the best results in week 1, he was on the field for almost every single snap. And then he was close to min price last night on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So it was reasonable to conclude that for those reasons, he was a good value play last night. And another thing I'll say too is any play that you like, any particular player stat for whatever reason, I think there should be some sort of reason you like them beyond just X player scored X amount of fantasy points in week one, therefore he's a good play in week two. And it should be the same thing the other way. It's not like this guy sucked in week one, he ruined my lineups, therefore I can't play him in week two. It should be look for opportunity more than anything, which is always the most important thing of DFS is how many snaps is somebody getting, how many targets are they getting, how involved are they in the offense. And opportunity is really more important than the ultimate results. The results will follow as long as the opportunity is there. If somebody caught 2 passes last week and went for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's probably not replicable. But anyway, we'll dive into some of the specific players over on Yahoo Daily Fantasy for this slate, starting with the quarterback position. And I think right off the bat, we have to look at Jalen Hurts, who looked exceptional last week. And he's somebody who, I think the one concern we had coming into the season was his job at all in jeopardy after they went and traded for Gardner Minshew as a backup. Hurts looked really good. And one thing that's going to be important with Hurts, as long as he is on the field, he's going to be a good fantasy producer because of how well he runs the ball from the quarterback position. So at least right now in the initial build that I did, I ended up with more exposure to Jalen Hurts than any other quarterback over on Yahoo. He's going to be pretty popular for me on most sites, I assume. But what do you make of Hurts heading into this game?
Yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. Hurts, any game, he can pretty much get you in there from a rushing perspective. The major problem that I always have with Hurts and is just who do we want to stack him with, and are is his passing capabilities enough to really bring along some of his teammates so that you don't have to pick as many guys to really go off. So that's probably my biggest concern. I do think Dallas Goedert is probably the best option for that. And I think that he is a fine option. But outside of that, it starts getting tough if you want to do like multiple stacks or anything like that. But I do think that Hurts is one of the better ones. And he ranks pretty high in my overall rankings. So we've published this week for the first time on the site is a Pro Plays tool, and it allows you to see where a whole bunch of us have our guys ranked, and I have Hurts ranked second for Yahoo right now. These are all rankings of just, where do we see them in terms of upside and overall value on the slate before taking into consideration things like leverage that you're trying to get on the field. So I think that's going to be a super powerful thing, and hopefully it does well for everyone, and Hurts will rank pretty high for me on it.
Yeah, and thanks for Steve for putting that together, and too, thanks for Steve for putting up with my questions and not thinking of me like an asshole while I'm asking questions about how all the stuff works and how to upload all the data for the Pro Plays. But that is definitely going to be a valuable tool where people could head it on over to Awesemo.com. They see some of the players that we're actually rostering and who we are getting exposure to in our initial builds. But yeah, Jalen Hurts, somebody that I certainly like quite a bit, and I kind of feel like maybe his passing ability got underrated a little bit heading into last week, and even maybe a little bit now, because at least in terms of pass attempts going back to last year, Philly has let him throw the ball a decent amount, where here's his starts heading back to last year, starting with the game against the Saints. 30 pass attempts, 44, 39, 20 in week 17 against Washington, then opens up this season with 35 pass attempts. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the most prolific passer in the world, but just the idea that Philly is allowing him and they're comfortable with him throwing the ball that often, that's definitely going to be beneficial. And then obviously included with the seven rushes he had for 62 yards. Now at the top of the pricing tier over on Yahoo, we've got Kyler Murray is at $37, Josh Allen at $39, Russell Wilson at $35, Tom Brady at $41. Of these guys, the one that stands out the most to me relative to the amount of exposure the field has to him right now is Josh Allen, because Josh Allen right now we have projected to be in 6.6% of the field lineups, Kyler Murray 10.2%. So Murray individually, I would think if we did not include how much the field is on them and how popular they are, he would just be the better play on a points per dollar basis. But considering that the field is rostering Josh Allen at almost half the clip that Kyler Murray is, I kind of think this is a little bit of an overreaction to everybody seeing how much Buffalo struggled in week one. And this is a spot where Josh Allen was so good last year and so good from a fantasy perspective. I think that we're looking at a quarterback who's chalk in week one, failed, and now the field public is kind of getting off him. I think Josh Allen is not popping up in enough of the field's lineups for this week.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with everything there. That Josh Allen's performance in week one was definitely subpar, but we do have a huge sample of games last year. I guess huge is relative, 1 year, but I think it's fairly safe to say that he's okay. I know I actually saw a lot of people talk about, he was so great last year because the fans weren't as rowdy in the game and stuff like that. I don't know if I'll buy into that as much. If we continue to see him struggle on the road or something like that, maybe, but overall, I think he's a talented player, and I think that he's going to be able to put up pretty good numbers in this matchup. Miami is a tough defense, and they are on the road, but yeah, I think that's a good spot. Similar for Kyler Murray. I think you'll see the opposite a little bit, that he might get some appreciation from blowing up the slate a bit last week. And he also doesn't have a great matchup against Minnesota. It's not the worst, but it's not one of the most favorable for him on the season either. So I think you might see a few more people rostering him than what you would expect throughout the season. And because of that, I think I might be a little bit lower on him and more on Josh Allen as well.
And then just in the same price tier, somebody who there's obvious upside in general with Tom Brady, and he looked ridiculous in week one. And, Tom Brady, I want to write him off every year, but eventually he's going to look old, right? And then he never really quite does. But here's one issue I have with him over on Yahoo for this week. He's $41. There's no real rushing upside with Tom Brady, and a matchup against Atlanta where Tampa Bay is currently favored by 12 points. So I don't know if Tom Brady's going to have to throw the ball a ton in the fourth quarter in this game. And just considering his price point at $41, how do you think you're going to be handling the Tampa Bay passing offense in a game where there's upside, but I think there's maybe a little more downside than might be perceived, just because they might not have to throw the ball much in the second half?
Yeah, so I think Tom Brady is a really tough one for all the reasons you mentioned. I can't disagree with any of them. $41, he's not the bet, which is the highest, and he's not the highest projected for me just from a raw point standpoint. So that in of itself is tough. I don't think that he's going to go under the radar. It's Tom Brady. He just had a really huge game on a primetime game, which will, get him keep him in favor with everybody. And that'll probably make him a little bit more popular than what you would have expected for him. Typically, the total against Atlanta is pretty high. The one thing that does get maybe overlooked a little bit for mid-tier priced guys is if you have a huge total and a big favorite, maybe you aren't able to finish out the game, but you've really racked up a ton of points in the first three quarters or 3.5 quarters, and that's not necessarily a problem because you're just able to control the game so much easier. But when you're the highest priced guy on the slate, it's really a lot harder to really handle that situation and be able to, in 4 quarters, be able to dominate the game that much. Plus, his receivers are expensive, so he was coming up really low for me, probably one of the lower amounts of anyone, especially of anyone in this top tier of pricing. So yeah, I'm pretty much off of him this week.
Yeah, and another thing too with Tom Brady's receivers, it's really hard to know who to stack him with. And not only is it an issue with just them being expensive and salary constraints, but it's so many guys that are good, and the ball could be spread around. Like I wasn't really on Gronk for showdown contest in week one, and he ended up being a pivotal piece that was needed in those contests. But then also, like, Mike Evans wasn't even involved in the offense really in week one. He hardly had any fantasy points, was hardly getting targeted at all. We saw Chris Godwin with a big game, Antonio Brown. Any given week, I think we're going to see the production change from guy to guy, and that's going to make it a little difficult to predict. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting to look through these games, have you noticed the totals and the start times of the games for this week? So there are 4 games on this slate that have a total of 50 points or higher. It is all 4 of the games that have a 4:00 start or later. So we got Cardinals, Vikings, Bucks, Falcons, Chargers, Cowboys, and then Seahawks, Titans. All those games have a total under 50. Those are all the 4:00 games. Every game with a 1 p.m. start is an under 50 point total. There is going to be this is going to be one of the weeks where I think potential minutes remaining really is key in some of these contests, because I think a lot of people are going to be loading up on some of these later games. One of the players in particular who I'm also struggling a little bit to know what to do of. What do you make of Dak Prescott, who looked fairly healthy coming back from that ankle injury, which was something I think that was a little bit concerning coming into the year, was how healthy was he going to look? And this is the game with the highest total on the slate, 55-point total. Dak Prescott, fairly expensive, $37 over on Yahoo. But if I'm looking for one of the contrarian pay-up options, I'd rather go to Dak Prescott at 4% than Tom Brady at 2%. Just after seeing how healthy Prescott looked in week one, he was a fantasy monster last year before he got hurt. And the other thing too is the targets. We kind of know they're going to CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper for the most part. Michael Gallup a little banged up. So I think Dak Prescott has the more clear path to upside as a pay-up option, as a contrarian play. Do you agree with me, or is there maybe somebody else you're looking at as a contrarian option on the high end?
Yeah, so first of all, that's a really good point about the late starts. I hadn't noticed that. So one thing that you can definitely do from that standpoint is keep some open spots potentially, just to see if you have some players that do really well. You could late swap onto safer guys at these late games, or vice versa. If your team's not doing very well, you can kind of push back some, push to more aggressive players. So I think there's a lot of game theory that you might be able to partake in this week in particular from that. And I guess it means that I need to keep my current winnings on the down low and not really look at it early, because I do get into a habit of that on NFL. But no, for Dak in particular, I think that he's a really good stack. This is going to be, like you said, the highest game of the weekend. I think the Chargers have a fine defense, and I think that they're a good team, but both of the teams are going to want to throw the ball quite often. We do also see that with Michael Gallup being out this week, I think the share of pass are going to be a little bit more concentrated in general. So like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper should see pretty good bumps from that, instead of being so difficult to see who is going to get the ball in Dallas. You're going to have two guys that both, I think, are underpriced. They weren't priced appropriately for Gallup missing the time, and they make good stack partners with Dak. You could pair them both together, and I think that's a really good stack combo. One of the things that I had in my preseason rankings that I took kind of a fair amount of grief about, actually, was just I had Ezekiel Elliott ranked pretty low compared to just the fields in general. My thinking being that the Cowboys are going to want to pass a lot more. They saw Zeke not be as good last year, not as efficient. And when they have a good passing offense like they do, why do they want to, run a good but maybe overrated running back? And that seemed to be the case last week. So I'm going to stay with my gut on that one. That's sometimes overreacting a little bit. We mentioned earlier, you can do that, but sometimes if it backs up your prior hypothesis, you do it a little bit more. So I'm going to kind of stick with that a little bit more and be all on this stack here.
Yeah, and the Cowboys, as prolific as their offense was in week one, Elliott was not really involved. 11 carries for 33 yards, 2 catches for 6 yards. So it was really Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb. That's where most of the damage came from. So that kind of covers a lot of the expensive quarterbacks over on Yahoo. There's a couple of cheap ones that really stand out to me that I want to run by you. One in particular, who both you and I like the Miami offense quite a bit in week one, and Tua Tagovailoa. He ended up having a good but not great showing in week one against the Patriots. Ended up being a fairly low-scoring game at 17-16. But this matchup against Buffalo, I think, is a little easier than may meet the eye just from a fantasy perspective. And it's not because Buffalo has a bad defense, but just they play at such a fast pace that I think this could be a situation where Buffalo, as often as they throw the ball, the fast pace they play at, this could lead to more points than most teams we would expect, just in terms of them being a good actual real life defense. Maybe it doesn't matter as much when they're playing at a really fast pace. Kind of think of it like the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA, where it's a team that finished, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 6th or 7th in defensive efficiency last year, but they still yielded a lot of fantasy points just because they played at such a fast pace. I kind of think the Buffalo Bills could be in a similar situation. So I look at Tagovailoa, $23 over on Yahoo. I like stacking it with Devante Parker. That is a stack that I'm looking to get well over weights of the field on, and we currently only have the field at 2.9% on Tua.
Yeah, so I think that was a pretty good game for Tua. you're not going to see Miami rely on him too heavily, I think is the one thing. But I mean, he had 6 out of 27 for 200 yards against the Patriots. That wasn't an easy matchup by any ways, and they got the win, so that was good. He rates 24th though on Football Outsiders QB rankings. That's not a super great thing, and it may continue to worry me a little bit about him breaking out. But yeah, I think that he is a fine play. He's not going to be one of my highest, but given how much I think everyone else is going to be off of him, I'll definitely be over the field. And I agree that Devante Parker is the guy that I would be most interested in. We do have Will Fuller. I think was announced that he's not playing this morning, so I haven't redone all my projections without him yet. But that could also keep the targets a little bit more concentrated as well on like Parker and Waddle and those guys. So I think that makes a pretty good sense.
It's funny how some of those situations work, because in theory, Will Fuller being out makes it a worse situation for Tua, which is true. And it's maybe a little harder for Tua to produce, but it also makes it a little more predictable who's going to have success if he does produce. And so that's something then that just kind of raises Tua for me naturally when I'm building my lineups and trying to make stacks. Is if Devante Parker but Devante Parker mainly being the guy who ends up getting a projection boost, he ends up looking like a better receiver. That just kind of pulls up Tua just by the nature of me trying to get to stacks. Because then all of a sudden when Parker is one of the top wide receivers, and then you got Tua who, while points per dollar, maybe he's not the best quarterback in the world on the slate, he's still cheap and he is a receiver that's easy to get to. So it just kind of ends up making me get to that kind of stack combination more in my lineups. But is there any other cheap quarterback here over on Yahoo that's really standing out to you?
I think the other one that really stands out to me is Herbert on the Chargers. I think that game in total we talked about a little bit with Dallas already, but I think he's a really good spot. That's going to be a high scoring game. He always is good to stack up with Keenan Allen, so that's pretty safe. The other guy that also he could make a good stack with is Jared Cook. Jared Cook's price is so low. Not typically looking to pay down at tight end, but his price is pretty good, and he had a really nice game with 56 yards on 8 targets last game, so that's a pretty impressive feat. And then you also have all those guys on Dallas that we talked about that are run backs. So that's my favorite game so far at this point in time, and I think that he makes a really good option.
Totally sensible. Game total for that is 55. That is one of the ones in that later slate of games that has the really high totals. 55, by the way, the highest total on the slate, and it should be a competitive game. There's only a 3-point spread there, so both Dallas and the Chargers, it could really be a shootout type game, and that could be one where I'm really looking to make double stacks. Like I wouldn't mind going Herbert with a couple of his wide receivers, and you can even run it back with Cooper and Lamb on the other side. That's a game that I'm very interested in stacking heavily. Let's get over to the running back position, and the number one player that's standing out the most to me, who's popping up in just so many of my lineups in the initial build, is Chris Carson. $24 over on Yahoo. That price in itself, I just think is a little bit too cheap for a guy who, at least last week, 16 carries, ended up also getting 3 receptions. It appears he's going to be playing a fairly significant role once again in the Seattle offense. Another game, very high total, 54 points. Seattle, a 6-point favorite over the Titans, who struggled a little bit in week 1. Just due to the overall pace of play in this game and just a general misprice on Chris Carson. I think he should be more expensive than $24. He is my favorite overall play on Yahoo. He's the player that I'm getting the most exposure to right now. Does that make sense to you?
Yep, I think so. We saw also, you mentioned the number of carries that he got. He got 78% of the snaps. That's higher than any snap count that he had all of last year. So it looks like they're going to go pretty heavy with him, with Hyde not being on the team anymore. The second highest on the team was Penny at 13%. It was kind of spread out among the rest of the running backs. So it's pretty clear that he's the guy that they're trusting. And I know that doesn't always last for Chris Carson. He seems like if he gets in the doghouse quite easily, but when he's on good terms with the coaching staff, I think I'm going to be on him as well. And I have no problem with that play at all. And he is, I don't know if he's quite my highest, but he's pretty close if he's not.
Yeah, and the $24. There's a lot of guys to like in this price range. There's Chris Carson at $24, Joe Mixon at $24, Najee Harris, who is $25. He was on the field for basically, I think it was either every play or almost every play last week. It ultimately didn't yield results. 16 carries for 45 yards. He was targeted 3 times in the passing game. So the results certainly weren't there, but a favorable matchup for him this week against the Raiders. And if he's going to get that kind of workload again, it's kind of hard to not like him. He is going to be popular though. So what do you make of these other guys who are in the same price range as Chris Carson, who also project really well for us? Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, are these guys that you also like?
So were you off Twitter this week or what? I thought everyone told us Najee Harris played 100% of the snaps. So
I knew it was a lot. I didn't know if the exact number was 100%, and I didn't want to misquote it, but I knew it was a high number.
Yes. Yeah. 100%, which it doesn't matter between 190. If you're getting that high, you're pretty good. I think that he's going to be pretty interesting. I think so. Like I said, he was touted a lot on Twitter this week by a lot of people in his 100% playing time, but how many people really are in the Twitter game and following all the people on Twitter and listen to all those things? A fair amount, yes, but DFS is so huge that a lot of people aren't, and what they're going to see is they're going to see his box score, and it wasn't very impressive. 16 for 46, 3 targets for 3 yards, and they're going to be not too excited. And they're just going to say, I don't really want to plug him into my lineups. So what you have to do is you have to take into consideration those the high amount of opportunities that he got. Hope that he has a little bit better efficiency, and hopefully he'll get a little bit more in the targets as well. I don't know. In theory, he was supposed to be someone that was able to catch the ball quite a bit. So I like Najee Harris quite a bit. He is the one that was coming up about just over Chris Carson, it looks like. So yeah, he's really good. Joe Mixon, I think, is also a really good spot against Chicago. That's a nice spot. He always is on the field for Cincinnati, and I never feel like he's going to have a blow-up game, but he always is pretty consistent, and he puts up scores that aren't really going to tank your lineup. So I don't have any problems going with him as well. So that's really a good price point. Last week on Yahoo, we talked a lot about how you wanted to maybe pay up for wide receivers, and I think this week that kind of the middle 20s range is a good price point for a lot of wide receivers.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at just the lineups to build right now. They are so balanced for me over on Yahoo right now. I think although a lot of running backs in the mid range really look like strong plays. We mentioned those three: Chris Carson, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Darrell Henderson, another one who played a massive role for the Rams in Week 1. So how is that impacting your pay up options? Because I'm scarily light on guys like Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Nick Chubb in the build I have right now. The reason being is I just think those guys that are $24, $25, Henderson being 18, on a points per dollar basis, they make for stronger plays. And that just means I'm not getting to the upper tier of guys that much. So are any of the guys in the upper tier really standing out to you as plays, or is it also kind of a thing where it looks like in the build you have right now, it might be a little more balanced for you?
Yeah, so definitely I'm not getting to any hardly a Derrick Henry, which definitely means that I'm going to have a tough week because anytime I do that, he's going to blow up for a huge game. But Alvin Kamara, not getting a ton to either. But I think I'm making room for Cook and McCaffrey just because they can blow up the slate. I'm not getting to them nearly as much as I would be with Carson and Harris, for instance. But I think those guys are key enough for their offenses, both in the passing and running game, that you have to get to them at least somewhat. Henry, you can at least kind of fade because of not being involved in the passing game as much, and I think that's a game that really could shoot out, and they might need to run a little bit more often. But Christian McCaffrey, first game back, he had 21 carries for 98 yards, 9 targets for 9 catches and 89 yards. Just didn't get into the end zone, so we didn't really hear him blowing up the slate. That might keep him off of some of the people's radars to go all in on him. But I think that he could easily have another real good game. So I'm going to make room for those two guys, probably just be more sporadic on other guys like Chubb and Henry, though.
Yeah, you kind of have to make the cut somewhere, especially because those guys we mentioned in the mid tier are such good points per dollar plays that you can't really play all of these guys. And it would be easy to just be like, yeah, Christian McCaffrey's a good play, Dalvin Cook's a good play, Alvin Kamara's a good play, Derrick Henry. But you have to kind of make the cutoff somewhere, or else people listen to the show and build in the lineups. Like, what do I do with this information? But yeah,
for one thing I'm doing is I'm getting a little bit more running backs than I normally do, actually. So that might be one way to get a little bit more of the running backs into your lineup.
And then I'm trying to look through my exposure, see if there's anybody that's, a real cheap value that's making it into a bunch of my lineups. Is there anybody that's like a real value option you're seeing sub, let's say, cutoff being Darrell Henderson at $18? Anybody below that you think makes for a really strong value option on Yahoo?
So I do like Darrell Henderson. That's a good call. He did play 94% of the snaps last week. I think Sony Mitchell will cut into those a little bit this week, and then probably a little bit more as the season progresses. Under that price, though, I think Mike Davis looks pretty good again. He was one of the sharper plays last week. He didn't produce like it, unfortunately, but if you look at some of the higher volume players and what they did, a lot of them were quite heavy on Mike Davis, including myself, which unfortunately, if he would have done a little bit better, that might have been helpful. But he was on the field a lot. He was on there 75% of the time. Gallman was a surprise inactive. A lot of people had been hyping Gallman up, actually. I think we talked about it on this show, that I felt like he was getting too overhyped, and that was clearly the case. He will probably, once he's used to the offense, he'll be more involved in the team. But yeah, I don't know that that's quite yet. And I think Mike Davis against Tampa Bay will be pretty good. The problem, I guess, the one problem that you might have to look out for on Davis is they don't include him in the passing game as much, and if they're trailing, that could be a problem. But maybe they'll try a little bit more, since it wasn't successful. That Atlanta looked pretty bad last time, and they're going to want to be a little bit more aggressive and getting the ball to him even in the passing game.
Yeah, and by the way, people are saying that Josh Jacobs was just ruled out. Let's see if that is the case, because hard to get the news updates sometimes when we're in the middle of a show. But let me search this really quick. And it would help if I spelled Jacobs correctly and didn't write it as Josh Jackson because of my phone auto-correcting. But Josh Jacobs, did you see if he was ruled out, Steve? Oh, there we go. Adam Schefter, 7 minutes ago.
Yep.
So that's relevant news. We could touch on that. So that is actually going to open up a value play who I was not prepared to talk about on this slate, because I didn't know that Josh Jacobs wasn't going to be playing. But Josh Jacobs did get hurt towards the tail end of the game against the Ravens on Sunday night. Now Adam Schefter has confirmed that he's not going to be playing Sunday for Sunday slate. Kenyon Drake, $15 over on Yahoo. We don't have updated projections yet. Obviously, it's new news. It's happening during the show. I would have to assume that Kenyon Drake, I don't know that he becomes my favorite overall value play on the slate, just because, number one, he's not min price. And then number two, also, there's already good serviceable options around this price point. Like, I imagine I'm still going to like Darrell Henderson at $18 more than Kenyon Drake at $15, especially because it's a fairly tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Just kind of initial reactions. What do you think about Kenyon Drake as a play at $15?
Yeah, I think he'll be pretty good. He's a guy that, in general, we know can catch the ball pretty well. We know that he's been a lead back before, and I don't think that Vegas is going to be too hesitant to rely on him too much. Their total isn't very exciting because of the matchup at Pittsburgh, but yeah, I think at $15, you don't need everything to be perfect aligned. You just need most of the things to be aligned. So yeah, I think he'll be one of the better plays, which will just kind of mix up all those running backs that we just talked about. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and shout out to the YouTube chat for giving us the relevant information. Always appreciated. And then it's always a thing where we're doing a show in the middle of Friday. I'm not scouring Twitter for news. It's not like if I'm doing the NBA show and it's a live before lock, I'm anticipating news. Generally, Friday at 3:30 in the afternoon, I'm generally not on Twitter looking for news. We're in the middle of a show, so appreciate you guys pointing that out. And that is going to bring Kenyon Drake into play, and was not really on my radar until that happened right there, because the last blurb I'd read about Josh Jacobs was actually that he was banged up but expected to play on Sunday. Obviously not the case anymore. So we have another value option in play. But let's move over to the wide receivers now. And right away, somebody who a lot of these guys we've kind of already talked about when we talked about quarterbacks who's going to correlate with some of the QBs we liked in the stacks. My most rostered wide receiver right now, I kind of alluded to it a little before, it is Devante Parker. Only $14 on Yahoo. That is an egregiously low price. Even if the Buffalo Bills have a good pass defense to what I talked about earlier, the Bills played a really fast pace. So that is going to counteract some of how good their defense is. And there's just going to be extra plays called. So Devante Parker, who I do expect is going to be the number one receiver for Miami this year. There is no Will Fuller in the mix. And we had him targeted 7 times in week 1 against the Patriots. This is a spot Devante Parker at $14. I think is a very strong value option.
That's a good bold take. I like Devante Parker, but especially the public I don't think is going to be on him a lot, just because they're so afraid of Tua and how much maybe he hasn't really blown up. So I think that's a really strong take. He's not one of my highest players, but I certainly will be on him more so than what the field. So yeah, I like that as a good strong take. So good call.
Is there another cheap receiver who you look at that you, let's say around the price tag of Devante Parker? So Parker, $14, just say anybody like sub 18, 17 and below. Is there anybody in that price range who is making it into a high percentage of lineups right now?
So the one that I would say that's coming up quite high for me is Juju. So that's also a situation where, I think this could really be a shootout game with Vegas. Claypool still didn't really step up as much as I was thinking that he might have stepped up this year. So he was only on the field for 68% of the snaps. I know that's never going to get as high just because of him playing in the slot and not having as many routes available. But Deontay Johnson and Juju were both in like that 90% snap rates, and I did worry a little bit that they would mix Claypool in a little bit more so and at the expense of those two, but it didn't really seem to happen. So I really like going with either of those guys, and they're both pretty cheap. So Deontay Johnson was a little bit higher than your price point, but I do think that both of those are really good ones. They could be, I don't know that I love stacking them with Big Ben. He's a little bit expensive, but they certainly make sense if you want to include them in your lineups just for how cheap they are.
Yeah, and one other thing also is I'm just kind of looking at overall where the field's at on some of these receivers. There's no real chalk wideout on Yahoo for this week. We've got Amari Cooper projected to be in 16.5% of the field's lineups. It's not like a crazy high number by any stretch of the imagination. The only other wideouts that are double-digit percentage, we've got Cooper Kupp 10%, Stephon Diggs 10.2%, Ridley 11%, CeeDee Lamb 11.3%. It's kind of a thing where I don't think we have to be too worried about any being super popular, at least as of now. Maybe that'll change by the time we get updates on Sunday. But I'm pretty surprised at how flat it is. It looks like a lot of the more chalk players are coming at the running back position. Wide receivers a little more spread out, and I think that some of the guys here at the top, you and I both liked them earlier, and I don't really find this to be problematic in terms of popularity. 16% for Amari Cooper, 11% for CeeDee Lamb. I'm overweight to both of those guys in my builds right now, even though they are the two most popular receivers. Is that reasonable to you, or do you still think they're picking up a little bit too much exposure?
No, I love both of those guys. I think that's a key game that you should stack up, and I have no problem going with those. The ones that might get a little bit high also that could be a little bit sneaky is like Diggs and Metcalf. Those guys are always a little bit higher than what they end up. We have them already with a pretty good projected rostership, but I think that they could creep up a little bit more. And if they start to, those are guys that I'm going to be a little bit more worried about playing, and that's going to worry me because they can like blow up the slate at any time. So those are the guys that I'm probably most worried about of how they're coming up in my rosters right now. But yeah, I think also part of it is it's just tough to get up to that price point because those running backs, even though they're the mid tier, it's tough. Kind of the same thing we were talking about at the top end running backs. it's a little bit tough to get to those. It's also tough to get to some of these top end wide receivers, whether it's Hopkins, Diggs, Metcalf, AJ Brown, Lockett. I love all those guys, but and they're all in pretty good spots, but it's just they're coming up for me a little bit less than what I would like to on this initial run. So I have to really think about, do I really want to spend as much on those running backs? Do I want as many running backs in my roster as what the initial builds are telling me, or do I want to try to attack it a different way? I might try to balance it out a little bit more, but I think that's something that everyone's going to have to make a decision for here. What do you think about some of those guys?
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is Cooper and Lamb are just priced incorrectly on Yahoo, given the Gallup's out, given the total of this game, and given how we saw this team attack the passing game in week one. CeeDee Lamb at $23, Amari Cooper at $24. But to your point about some of the pay-up options here, yeah, I'm not really getting to them all that much. Stephon Diggs, I actually prefer Colt Beasley for a cheaper price on Yahoo for this slate. So that kind of pinches my exposure to Diggs because I'm not going to be making a ton of teams that have Diggs and Beasley both in them. Then you get to DeAndre Hopkins at $35. I find that to be a little bit of a tough price point. Then guys, even when you go down a little bit, not all the way at the top, but Chris Godwin at $28. The targets I think are ultimately going to be spread out a little bit in Tampa Bay. And I don't think that Chris Godwin for his price point is the safest receiver in the world. And then Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. There's so much variance between those two guys. We talked about it. It's a DK Metcalf week last year. Then it's a Tyler Lockett week. And both of them are expensive. It's $32 for Metcalf, $31 for Lockett. And my preference is to play Chris Carson instead of those guys on Yahoo. I think Chris Carson at $24 is a better play than those guys. And just to go through some of the projections we have and the salaries, DK Metcalf at $32. We have projected for right about 14 fantasy points. Tyler Lockett also right around the same number. But then we have Chris Carson, who's $24. We have projected for significantly more fantasy points than both those guys, and he's cheaper. So it's hard for me to not prioritize Carson. And then, I'm not going to be making lineups that have Chris Carson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. So ultimately, that's kind of what makes me a little thin on them. But I do want to ask you about one guy who I brought up there kind of in passing. That's Colt Beasley, because one of the reasons I was later on Diggs is because of the amount that I like Beasley in the spot. And once again, it's just because of the workload. Week one, Colt Beasley ended up getting targeted 13 times by Josh Allen. He also drew a ton of targets last year. And this is another guy, considering the pace they play at, how much the Bills are looking to pass the ball this year. I think Colt Beasley at $15, another excellent value option at wide receiver. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that those 13 targets are something that you should definitely look at. 91% of the time he was on the field for snaps. We do, and some of the snap numbers that I'm quoting are the new tool that we have over at Awesemo as well, where you can see the number of snaps each player played, both in account level as well as the percentage of their team snaps. So those are one of the most important things that I look at each week. So you can check out that detail as well. So that's a really cool thing, and that's free for everyone. So yeah, definitely check that out. But all that playing time and all those targets only got him 8 receptions for 60 yards. So that's pretty weak, and Gabriel Davis only saw 51% of the snaps. So it is possible that he sees a little bit more. So I think that two things from that. I think that the field is not going to be on Colt Beasley too much because they saw that 8 receptions for 60 yards. They don't necessarily see the 13 targets. They don't necessarily see the 91% snap rates. That 91%, by the way, was the most he played all of any game last year. I think it was like 85% was his other high, and that was actually quite a bit of a above that. Like he was normally around 72% last year. So big improvement for him. And I think he's going to be a little bit sneaky. And I don't think I'm too worried about Gabriel Davis, but that is something that if he doesn't start, hauling in a little bit more of the passes, that Davis could cut into his playing time a little bit more. So that's maybe my only concern on Beasley.
Yeah, it's really also, it's a price point thing. If he was a salary that wasn't $15, then I would feel differently, but he's just so cheap that he fits into lineups. And once again, I have a lot of fairly balanced builds over on Yahoo, at least in the initial run of lineups I did. Colt Beasley at $15 becomes a pretty key part of those. Also, you mentioned some of those free tools that we have over at awesemo.com, including the snap count numbers. But also, I want to reiterate, if you want to get 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum, if you are new to Yahoo, head on over to Yahoo, make your first deposit through awesemo.com. If you make a minimum deposit of $10, enter a contest, you get 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. That'll get you all the tools we have, and that'll help you build winning lineups for football season. We've got tools over for Yahoo as well. So you make that initial deposit, very low cost to get great value in return. 2 months of Awesemo Plus Platinum. The value of that is $180, and you can get that for only a $10 deposit over on Yahoo if you're new to the site. So that is certainly something to check out. We've covered a pretty wide range of the wide receivers here. Is there anybody that we have not mentioned that you think will be a core part of your lineups that we should be bringing up?
I don't see anyone that stands out too much. I think we've hit on most of them. Maybe Calvin Ridley, just because I think that Atlanta could be playing from behind a bit, and I think that you could see him get a lot of work. He's obviously their de facto number one now, and he's deservedly so. I think he's a true stud player for them. So I think that he makes a lot of sense, and he's priced just a tad bit lower than some of those guys at the $32, $31 price points. He's at 28. So I think that makes a lot of sense to go to him and hope for that kind of that shootout with Tampa Bay and playing from behind probably.
Yeah, I like that, Cole. And it kind of correlates to where we have, I know that in our projections, we've Mike Davis projected pretty well. And that's something that just kind of scares the crap out of me because, sure, if the game's close, Mike Davis, in the first half last week against Philadelphia, we saw him play a pretty significant role. But then they got down big to Philadelphia. Mike Davis just didn't really do anything in the second half. And you consider that the Falcons are 12-point underdogs to Tampa Bay this week, which is by far the widest spread in the late slate of games that have the high totals. Overall across the slate, the biggest spread is Browns versus Texans. Cleveland favored by 13 points, but 12 points is pretty problematic for me in terms of running back that seems game script dependent on that being a competitive game. So also the reason being that I bring it up is that correlates to Calvin Ridley potentially being more involved in the offense, and maybe they get Kyle Pitts more involved also. So I think it's a good point to jump over to the tight ends, and let's talk about Kyle Pitts a little bit here because he was uber popular in week one. Everybody was on Kyle Pitts. Now we get to week two. Kyle Pitts did not have the best week one, and everybody's off him. So look at Kyle Pitts. He is $18 now on Yahoo. He is projected to be in 1.4% of the field's lineups. So last week, you and I, we were a little lighter on Pitts in the field just for the reason of he's going to be popular. We don't know what his role is going to look like. I still think there's variance here, but now I'm more inclined to be on him as a contrarian option because nobody's on him this week. It feels like a massive overcorrection to Pitts from week one. So do you feel better about Pitts as a tournament option now that the field is basically taking the complete opposite stance on him?
Yeah, absolutely. If he ends up way down at 2%, I do think he'll get maybe a little bit of bounce back. A few people will start touting him if he's that low, and then just like us here, and say, hey, we got to get back on him, and I'll probably jump him up a little bit. But I think he will be lower in general because that 4 for 31 was not very pretty, and he had some drops that weren't super great also. So the thing is, you want to take your chance on guys that have a lot of variance in their projection when the field is not on them. And when the field is on them, you want to fade those guys with a lot of variance in their projections. And Pitts fits that perfectly. And this week is a perfect time for that. So you could easily, and it's going to be a game where likely they're going to have to pass quite a bit. So things are lining up a lot better for Pitts this week than last week, although they ended up having to pass a lot last week also. He still didn't do really well, but I think it's a better spot for him this week overall, and I'll have likely more of him. Yep.
So one other thing I'll add about Kyle Pitts is, so last week, and obviously the game was not good from a fantasy purpose, and he was massively inefficient. He ends up getting targeted 8 times. That's nice. A lot of it came in garbage time, which, well, it's kind of hard to know what to make of that. Atlanta's such a big underdog this week. There's probably going to be garbage time again where they could try to get Kyle Pitts involved. And I would not be surprised at all if this is a situation for Kyle Pitts where it's like, hey, we used a lot of draft capital on this guy. We're down by 17, 21 points or something like that to the Buccaneers in the fourth quarter. It's a game where everybody's going like, why not target Kyle Pitts a lot to try to get him more involved, get him going, get him a little more involved in an NFL offense. And while it's maybe a little bit narrative-based, it's kind of what we saw last week. And I think this game script could set up similar. And just the fact the field's only on projected to be in 1.4% of lineups, that's so low that I think it's certainly a number to be overweight to. Where the field is flocking to that I want to get your take on. Darren Waller, after a massive Sunday night game that went to overtime, ran the getting targeted 19 times. He held in 10 catches, 105 yards and a touchdown. He is the most popular player on Yahoo today, and certainly the tight end position by a pretty wide margin. But right now we have him projected to be in 34.2% of the field's lineups. How are you handling Darren Waller, who's underpriced? He's in a good spot. He appears to be a far better option than the other tight ends, but he's also really popular. Are you inclined to get over or underweight to him in tournaments?
Yeah, that 34%, that's pretty high for a tight end. Typically, though, you have a couple of options. You have Kelsey, Waller, and Kittle as the high-end options, although it's actually Gronkowski that's priced the highest this time. I'm going to stay away from Gronkowski. I don't know how he's the highest, but we also don't have Kelsey. So that makes Waller and Kittle all that more appealing, just because those are the two guys that can really win the slate for you. And the pricing at Yahoo is such that they're not like far and above the other guys. So you can really get to these guys pretty easily. So it's a pretty tough dilemma. 34% is pretty high. So I might end up going under that and hoping that we can find someone else that hits. But with my first builds, not weighting the ownership quite that high yet anyways, I did get a good amount of Waller because he did play 94% of the snaps. He was targeted 19 times. Only turned into 10 catches for 105 yards and one touchdown. I say only because 19 targets is massive. So he could have had even more. And it's just so tough to get too far away from Kittle and Waller. I think they've got to be, at least, no matter, even if they are popular, I think they've got to be key parts of your builds, and maybe get a little bit different elsewhere on like some of the wide receivers or quarterbacks.
And Darren Waller, the role that he played where he's going to get 19 targets, that's kind of like a wide receiver who just has tight end eligibility, is playing the position. And for reference, some of the other marquee wide receivers that we currently have in our Awesemo projections as being lower than Darren Waller. So we have Darren Waller right now projected for 13.84 Yahoo fantasy points. That is above Tyler Lockett. That is above CeeDee Lamb. That is above Calvin Ridley. It's above Deontay Johnson. It's above Justin Jefferson. And so these are wide receivers who, are some of the leading pass catchers from last year, or guys who are likely going to be leading pass catchers this year. And we've got Waller is cheaper than them and is playing in a position that's harder to fill. So he is really popular. I feel like this is a position where I'm just going to be eating the chalk, though, because I still just view him as being such a stronger option than some of the guys priced around him. It's not like Kyle Pitts from last week, where Kyle Pitts was really popular, and we just knew for sure what his role was going to be. I'm fairly confident Darren Waller is going to play a massive role in the Raiders' offense this week. We didn't really have that information about Pitts. The only other guy that I even think is kind of comparable to Waller on this slate is George Kittle against the Eagles. So 15.8% of lineups projected to be with George Kittle this week. I think it's fine to get overweight to that number, but I still prefer Waller even at being more popular. So George Kittle, how are you handling him in comparison to Waller?
Yeah, I feel the same. I think Kittle is slightly lower for me between the two. I think he's a fine pivot. If we see that the discrepancy between the field is so large that, Waller's at, let's say, 34% come Sunday, and we see that Kittle is down at like 10 or 15, then maybe that's a time that you go the other route. But as is right now, I think they're both going to be fairly popular, and I'm going to probably lean towards playing Waller more because they're so close. The one guy, just really quick, that might be a good pay down option, I think is Tyler Higby. He played 100% of the snaps last time. So that means that he's going to be pretty heavily involved in that offense, and we saw him do that before. So his year last year was down a little bit, didn't quite live up to some of the expectations, but in the end of 2019, he was really like one of the guys that really dominated that and the last couple of weeks of that season. And it is possible that he has another run like that in him. So I might be taking some shots on him as kind of a lower cost guy.
Yeah, I dig it. And also, there just aren't that many tight ends to really love outside of Waller or Kittle. Like I said, relative to the amount of exposure the field's getting to him, I like Kyle Pitts because the field's only getting to him in 1.4% of the lineups. But Tight end, it's going to be a pretty concentrated position for the field this week, and only a minute left. So let's just kind of quickly touch on DSTs. I don't think we have to go into too much analysis here before we head out, but how about give me a pay up option you like at defense and a salary saving option, and then we could call it a day.
So I don't really love any of the pay up options this week, to be honest. So I'll say a middle tier, which I don't know why Cleveland is middle tier because they're playing Houston. I think that they're a pretty good spot. And then the Bengals against the Bears, I think is a pretty good pay down option. No reason to pay up for anyone at the top, just because you can get such good deals elsewhere on other positions.
Yeah, I think, but I said this before. I only include the DSTs in the rundown. Number one, because people like to ask me about it. And two, I kind of enjoy how much it frustrates me where it comes up. It's like, we talk about defenses now. My least favorite position to roster in DFS now that we have kickers off of main slates. But that is going to do it for Steve and I. Guys, we have that great deal over on Yahoo. If you're new to Yahoo Daily Fantasy, head on over, make a deposit through our site. You only have to make a deposit, minimum of $10, enter a contest. You get 2 free months of Awesemo Plus Platinum, which is a great value. All the tools to succeed over at Yahoo. Other than that, guys, have a great day and good luck.